I met a guy in traffic, you know. He said, you have been interrupting Bello too much. Charlie, Bello is the guy, you know. So I think they like your revolutionary zest or something. You want to run for MP or something like that?
No.
Oh, are you sure? No, the guy was very excited. He was stopping me. He says, Charlie, you are Bello, let Bello talk. He said, look, Mr. Paul, I like your show. When Bello is there, go and sit down. Let him talk. Yeah. So welcome, Alhassan Bello. What is the latest? What is Russia gaining?
Well, these are the regions that are conducting the referendum. And then so, meaning if it goes as we've...
But some have ended. Some referenda have ended. Yeah, it's in favor of Russia.
So it's left with the result for Donetsk at the moment. I think around Zaporizhia is about 97% per the report.
For Russia, to join Russia?
To join Russia.
97?
97. In Luhansk is about 87%.
Wow.
In Kherson is about 93%. But mind you, even within these zones, you know, the Ukrainian counter-offensive took a portion of what they call Zaporizhia in Ukraine. So the referendum are taking place within the places that
Russia have. But that's bigger. It's bigger, isn't it?
So the entire Donbass amount to...
No, I'm saying that if you take, say, say Zaporizhia, the part that Ukraine have is smaller than the part that Russia has.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so the population, are they more on the Russian side?
Yeah, the population so far, the pre-war population of the entire Eastern Ukraine is about 6.5 million.
Hold on. So you are saying that the Ukrainian army has moved from Kiev and they are at this place?
Yeah, they are at the periphery of this. Oh, the Kiev, I think in the mid-March,
they moved.
The Russian forces were compelled to withdraw.
Yes, but we know Russia is withdrawing, but is Ukraine following them?
Yeah, they are following them.
Oh, then Ukraine is doing well.
Yeah.
With Ukrainian troops.
Yeah.
So that all this part is Ukraine, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So these are the
parts that are... So Ukraine are planning to try and take over this as well. That will be a difficult task, though.
Yeah.
That would be very difficult. But the ethnicity of the people here, what are they? What do they speak? Or Russia and Ukraine have the same ethnicity?
Eastern part of Ukraine is mostly Russophobe region. But then within that place, around this side are ethnic Russians. But when you go further around the areas of Kharkiv and the rest, they are mixed. But then Russian language is widely spoken across the Eastern Ukraine.
I see.
As a lingua franca.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So why is the international community saying that this referendum is a sham?
But then that takes us to what you call it, the UN article. We have to go back to the right to self-determination.
Yes.
And then I think it emerged around somewhere in 1860s, but it became very popular at the end of the World War I, World War II, and then this is the Atlantic Charter. But prior to that, during the, you remember the 14 points that was outlined by Woodrow Wilson. When he was intervening in the World War I.
American President Woodrow Wilson?
Woodrow Wilson. He aligned some 14 points that will be used to settle the dispute. One of them was, what do you call it? The 14 points talks about the right to self-determination. This is what
the right of a people to self-determination. Will that one be more about, if you talk about First World War, Austria and the German situation, because the forces then were trying to sort of put Austria and Germany together, something like that?
No. You know, by then we had two, in the World War I, we had two blocks. The triplet entity, that was the British, the French, and the Russians. And then you had the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, German Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. But then after that, but prior to that, you know, there was this, because the empire was huge, there were other nationals within each of the empires. So it's about how do you deal with the issue now that the empires have been dissolved. So you need to create, that's why we have the current Middle East itself was born out of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So one of the point was that, I think he said, a free, open-minded and absolute impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based upon strict observance of the principle that determining all such questions of sovereignty, the interests of the population concerned must have equal weight with the equitable government whose title is to be determined.
So is that a template that the United Nations uses for?
The portion of the 14 point were used to, to form the League of Nations. And that also was, it also appeared in the Atlantic Charter. That was signed between the British and the Americans to address the post-World War II world order. And then it's also found its way into the United Nations Charter that talks about. So these are the evolution of self-determination.
That's interesting. What's Mahatma Gandhi say? I'm interested in Mahatma Gandhi.
He also used the 14 point and the right to self-determination to stake a claim for Indian independence.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And we'll get to that. And then per the Atlantic Charter, the second, a clause was that, the agreement was that territorial adjustment must be in accordance with the wishes of the people concerned.
But why has Russia violated this? How can we say that Russia has violated this clause in the charter which says the territorial adjustments must be in accordance with the wishes of the people? Have we interviewed the people of
when we get to the UN, or the article that deals with the self-determination, then we'll begin to look at that.
Okay.
But I'm only trying to lay a preamble of the evolution of the right to self-determination.
Okay.
And then the same Atlantic Charter, the point number 3 also states that all people had the right to self-determination.
All people?
Yeah.
But I think the key point here is that we have to be able to ascertain whether the people want to or not. And I'm not sure whether in this war contest we have been able to do that.
So we'll get to that point. And that was what was used by the colonists. There was always this strict reference to the Atlantic Charter. And when pressure was mounted on Winston Churchill, he once said that I have not become the king's first minister to see over the liquidation of the British Empire. But then that was because the colonists were making reference to
the charter.
The charter that he signed.
Yeah.
And then Mahatma Gandhi is also staking his point. India was the British most precious possession in the colonial
at that time.
So he said, he was referring to the Atlantic Charter.
I venture to think that the Allied declaration that the Allies are fighting to make the world safe for the freedom of the individual and for democracy sounds hollow as long as India, and for that matter, Africa, are exploited by Great Britain. Very interesting.
And then this also takes us back to one thing. There was this issue that Gandhi was a racist and Africans were just panting here.
People thought he didn't like Africa. He didn't like black people.
But then, there were times where he made some series of racist remarks. But that was in the initial stage of his political life.
When he was in South Africa?
He was in South Africa. But then he was evolving. Gandhi was maturing. He was beginning to become politically conscious. So you can't take one aspect of his, speeches to begin to determine the man.
But somebody can also say this may have not been completely honest because he was fighting for India, but he needed to use Africa to make the case.
No, but he made it known to the British that he said if India becomes free, the rest of the British Empire will collapse.
And indeed, Nkrumah took inspiration from Nehru and Gandhi.
And the whole non-violence, everything made from him. Now let's go back. This is the UN Charter that deals with the right to self-determination. Article 1, point number 2 of it says, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for principle of equal right and self-determination of the people, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. So now the question is, how do you determine self-determination between the colonial era, when nations were seeking independence, and now where issues evolve within the territory of some countries? But now, per the Russian, argument is that they've always said that the eastern part of Ukraine, being Russian speaking, are under threat of the neo-Nazi element within the Ukrainian government. Well, some element of neo-Nazi are found away, the like of the Azov Brigade. But does that equate the entire Ukrainian system into a neo-Nazi government or neo-Nazi party? Obviously, no. We can't say that. But the fact that there are some element does not mean that it's a neo-Nazi government. But then that is the Russian argument. So they've premised their whole intervention on the fact that, the argument was that they want to go and protect Luhansk and Donetsk, right?
Yes.
But then, Article 33 of United Nations, that seeks to address what they call dispute among nations, state that parties to any dispute, continuance of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, shall first of all seek solution by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies or arrangement, or other peaceful means of their own choice. The Security Council shall, when it deems necessary, call upon parties to settle their dispute by such means. So the question is, prior to the invasion, did Russia resort to any of these, arrangement, that will determine whether it has a legitimate claim or not? Fine. Per the Russian argument, there was this attempt to negotiate with NATO. But then the tactics that was used was more like a carrot and stick approach. Because whilst they were calling for NATO to negotiate and give them guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO, but then they had amassed troops on the border.
They had already evinced an intention for war. Yeah. But
then the question now is, so by seeking dialogue whilst maintaining the element of force, does that fall within this? Because it states that you must first of all seek for solution by negotiation. That's a case where your attempt to seek for solution is back with element of force. Begin to see how dicey it is. But from the Russian perspective, they are characterizing, what do you call it, that referendum to be under the right of self-determination. But then now that post-colonial era, how do we determine the right to self-determination? Then let's look at the instance where South Sudan was carved out of Sudan. That will give us a practical example.
Okay.
So do we now say that anytime there is tension within a particular country, the right to self-determination applies or not?
But that was the case of Sudan, wasn't it?
That was the case of Sudan.
But the military situation in Sudan was UN-backed, wasn't it? It was UN force in Sudan.
No.
Was it America?
There was this series of civil war. We know when you go to the old Sudan, not now.
Omar al-Bashir.
The Sudan at the time.
Historical Sudan?
No, the Sudan at the time.
Yes,
Prior to,
the United Sudan.
Before 2011, had a linguistic, or let me say, ethnic divide between the northern Arab-dominated and the south, which is made of mostly African ethnic groups. You have the Nuer, you have the Dinka. You get so, but they felt that they were being, the resources was the oil actually was in the south at that time.
Okay.
And most of the oil was being exported, and the wealth or the benefit of the oil is being, what do you call it, kept in the north.
Okay.
So they felt that they were not getting their fair share of, and they took arms against the central government. And the war
in the civil war.
In the civil war. And they lasted for, what do you call it, almost 20-something years or so, 27 to 30 years. Part of the agreement that led to the negotiation was that the people of South Sudan would have to choose, after a government of national unity was formed by 2011, whether to be part of United Sudan or break away. But then, so now it's two different. But see, in the case of Sudan, it was an internal mechanism to solve an internal dispute.
But it was supervised by the United Nations, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There was United Nations involved.
Yes.
But then it was carried out because the war was between the nation. It was a nation at war with itself.
Oh, I get your point. It wasn't an external aggressor.
It wasn't an internal aggressor. But in the case of Ukraine now, you have to look at the fact that Russia has intervened. And then the election is not being supervised by UN because UN has the principle of non-interference. So now, when you compare the principle of non-interference of UN, we are supposed to respect territorial boundaries, and then the decision that was taken here, should we say that there was interference or not?
Well, but the interference was invited by the warring parties when they set up the National Government of National Unity.
No, but
so then you come back to the charter that talked about negotiation and all of that. So if Russia goes to a negotiating table, then both parties, Russia and Ukraine, can invite the United Nations in, and then they can decide. But United Nations can look at the situation and say, the next people are, they looks like they want to go to Russia, let's do a referendum. Even in Ghana, the plebiscite that occurred, it was United Nations supervised.
Yeah, that was the time, because Transvoter Togoland was a trust-ship territory, not part of the Gold Coast colony.
No, it wasn't.
So you had to decide the fate. It wasn't just in Ghana alone, you had the issue.
But let's assume that Russia will continue in this quest, and therefore those referendum will stand. Russia will try and use military power to secure those territories. How would Russia look like after that? The new Russian map.
So this is map of Russia in Europe. So that would be this current map with a portion of this side.
Oh, you didn't get it out for us. So Russia will, okay, so what's the population of Russia right now?
These are the population distribution between the two countries.
Okay, so where's Russia?
Russia is about 144 million population.
144 million, and Ukraine?
Ukraine has 44 million population.
And the territories, those territories that we are talking about?
Prior to the war, it has 6.5 million population.
Prior to the war, 6.5. So you're going to add, so Russian population is going to read 144 million plus something like 5 million.
I don't think so. Because of the war, they've been displacement, and then what do you call it?
But their territory was okay. When Russia started from there, did they displace them? They just used their place as a base and then decided to launch
people, prior to the when people saw the massing of troops on the other side, some left the place before the war. And then if you look at images emerging on the media, you could see that it's either the aged people who are left behind or those who are mostly pro-Russia. But those who are pro-West are leaving because they fear reprisals. You remember during the case of Crimea, when Crimea was annexed, captured by Russia, we saw, this is Crimea. It was already annexed by Russia in 2014. And even during Crimea, the vote resulted in 97%, what do you call it,
referendum.
in favor. But then the question now we have to ask is the 83% and the percentages coming from this place are coming based on the current population that have voted.
Not the entire population,
Not the
as
entire
we know it
population,
before
yeah,
the war.
because of the displaced.
We don't have all the information. Okay, let's talk about Russia itself now. Disturbing news coming in indicate that there's been shooting in Russian territory. We don't get that reported often. We don't know whether it happens and it's not reported or that it doesn't happen at all. But this one has been widely reported by Western media and even Russian television. Is it a way of people trying to create this to get Vladimir Putin to have security concerns at home so that he does not have enough time to focus on this international unilateral war that he's fighting?
Well, at the moment, reports are very difficult to ascertain because on one hand, you have a total blackout of the Russian media, but on social, on the social media, with the explosion of journalists from Sputnik,
yes, I get it. Yes, but there's been videos
and
of
then
this event.
On the Russian side also, there's been this attempt to control the media and regulate what comes.
But
out.
Russian media has reported the shooting.
So I'm trying to establish the fact that both sides are trying to limit what other side can say, what can get out.
Fair enough, but both have reported on this shooting.
On this particular shooting, it was reported as an isolated attack.
Yeah.
And then the casualty was about, I think, 17 dead and 24 wounded.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen regularly. And then parents, I mean, irrespective of the numbers, parents are going to be concerned. Like American parents are always concerned.
It doesn't happen regularly.
And that's creating security. Is that enough to begin to create security issues at home for Vladimir Putin?
No.
Because this happened in Moscow, central Moscow.
I think Putin would rather focus on the exodus we are seeing.
The other aspect, which is where a lot of Russian young people are leaving to countries where they don't need a visa to go, Belarus and all that. When they head conscription to the army, they are running away.
Yeah. This one is just an isolated attack. And prior to that, you can't remember the Beslan school attack. So schools have always been attacked on isolated basis, depending on which side. In the Beslan case, it was these Chechen rebels who attacked us to make headway. So,
do we now know who did this attack?
I think there was just a lone attacker.
A loner, but do we know whether he was influenced by
something?
No,
it was reported that he has psychological or mental issues.
Okay. So you think Vladimir Putin will be more worried about the sociological situation where Russian young people, quote unquote, jumping off the ship of patriotism and leaving the country because they don't want to go to war? This would never have happened in the time of Vladimir Lenin, you know that. So there's something changing about the psychologically of young Russians.
Yeah, so we need to look at the generational gap between those who were born before the collapse of the Soviet Union and those who came post-Soviet Union. You know, prior to the collapse, Soviet Union was a bit of a closed system whereby you need permission to go certain parts of the world. And then it also takes us to the, to the ideological underpinning of the side of Russian society. There are those who are still nostalgic about the Russian Soviet period.
About Lenin, Russia.
Yeah, the prestige, not just Lenin, probably the Stalin era.
Stalin, yeah.
Because Stalin really established and defined the structure of Soviet government.
Yeah.
Lenin was just an ideological brain.
Yes.
But then, when you look at Putin and his Slovaki cohort, those from the military background, you know, at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Putin was based in Eastern Germany.
Fighting.
At the time.
Yeah.
As a KGB officer. So they saw both the prestige and what they termed to be the embarrassment.
Okay, so they're trying to restore.
So now they are not really trying to restore. But if you look at what Russia did post-World War II, they sought a buffer between they and the West because they always have concern with Western proximity. And then what happened was that you could see that they created a buffer in form of the Iron Curtain. So now what they are trying to do is to now limit the rate at which NATO gets to them. And so Ukraine was a way of making a statement. But those who were born post-1990 didn't really see Soviet Union.
All of that, yeah.
They saw it with things of the past.
And they saw a global world,
and
a unipolar world.
They are more cosmopolitan. They are more, neoliberals. But then also, in as much as people are moving in their thousands, I don't really think they even amount to 1.1% of the Russian population.
Yeah, but that it happens at all.
But then another thing we need to look at, are they really going away because they are against the war? Or because they were issued with the conscription? There were supposed to be some exceptions.
Yeah.
Like people with medical background, engineers. But then in terms of handing over the conscription letter, there's this belief that some mistakes were being done whereby people who were supposed to be on the exempted list
are not being exempted.
And
the other way around.
So it also has to do with the conduct of
the process.
But Putin will be more concerned about that because what he sought to do was to bring 3,000 combatants into the field to allow him put a hold. You know, one thing about war is that you have two options. It's easier to go by air. Cripple your enemy's ability to resist, so you don't have problem of holding land against his attack. But when you go by land and capture territory, you have a burden of making sure you hold that territory. And because Russia went on initial attack by land rather than air power to neutralize the Ukrainian resistance, it failed in capturing or holding the ground, so it has to withdraw to this part. Now, he was expecting to bring the 3,000 combatants to fill the deficit of numbers that he required at the time to put a hold.
Where are the early numbers? Have they died?
Yeah, I think there was some died, but I know in war, apart from death, there are injuries, and there are also immobilities. So he needed to fill the gap.
Okay, let's leave it here. I'd like to get Ibrahim back on the